It's amazing to have been the first province of China to completely ban the selling of fossil cars.
We've got to balance all stakeholder expectations and requirements.
At the societal level, there's going to be major positive progress. But at the company level, the competition is brutal.
A very good example to the other cities and provinces of China that you don't have to use fossil cars, and it's possible to completely switch to the electrical vehicles.
It's going to be universal, and the question is, how long is it going to take?
Real issue for China in terms of making an international statement is how quickly and how successfully they can roll something out like this and implement it successfully across Shanghai, and that will really make a statement globally.
Welcome to the Chat Lounge. I'm Tuyu, and joining me for a chat on Hainan's fossil fuel car phase-out plan, Professor Andy Mok of Beijing Foreign Studies University, who's also the author of the newly released title, The Innovation Machine: How China Creates and Adopts Technology Through Governance. Mike Bastin, China observer and senior lecturer, the University of Southampton, and Chen Jiahe, the chief investment officer of the Beijing-based Novem Arcae Technologies. It's great to have you all back on the show, gentlemen. So China's southernmost tropical island province, Hainan, also known as the Hawaii of China, is racing toward a bold milestone, ending the sale of new fossil fuel-powered vehicles by 2030. So out of all of China's provinces, why was Hainan chosen as the first to set a timetable for such a phase-out plan? Jiahe, I understand you've spent a lot of time living in Hainan. Shall I start with you? What's your take?
Yeah, I really love this tiny little island that we usually call Hainan with the locals here, because we are quite a small island. It's amazing to have been the first province of China to have the plan to completely ban the selling of fossil cars in the future. Well, counting another 4 years. But currently, living in Hainan, we already have much less and less traditional and fossil cars. For example, when I'm taking taxi here, I think about 99% the taxi would be electrical vehicles.
Right.
So basically, it's already not that many traditional and fossil cars sold in this island. And because Hainan is actually pretty small, counting, it's about 200 kilometers from north to south. So it's not that large. So it's actually quite fitting for the using of electrical vehicles. So it's quite an amazing thing to be the first province of China to do so.
Then what kind of maybe unique features you think that Hainan is suitable or would be the one to be chosen first?
Well, there are many reasons why Hainan is the first province. I mean, if you look at the reform of Hainan in the overall picture of China's economic reform, Hainan has always been the pioneer to lead many reforming. It's a place where you have the first marketized property market back in the 1990s. And so many things has been conducted in Hainan first. Then when the government has got enough experience, these kind of jobs will be spread to other provinces. So this time it's also the same thing. Also, if you look at the free trade port, I mean, Hainan is now a place where many people all over the world can come over here without applying for a visa. It's also the first province in China. So this is one reason. Another reason is that Hainan is actually quite fitting for the electrical vehicles because, as I said, we are actually pretty small. It's only about 200 kilometers from north to south, and it's about 200 kilometers from east to west. So it's not a really large place. So electrical vehicles would be fitting very well in this place. Also because Hainan is a province that has tropical weather, so it's not too cold during the winter. We all know that batteries can actually lose about 30% or 40% of its ability during the very cold weather of the winter. So it's actually quite fitting for Hainan province. Also, Hainan is famous for its very good environment. And in order to protect the environment, one of the most important things that you have to do is to remove all the fossil cars. So I think it's also another reason.
Right. Andy, not
Yeah.
sure if you have any different angles to interpret this.
Sure. Well, I actually lived in Hainan for a couple of years a
Right.
long time ago. So, from a historical perspective, I think Hainan, as we just heard, is very, I think, in some sense, I wouldn't say isolated, but it makes a very good laboratory. So just when we looked at the opening and reform, Hainan as well as Shenzhen, which of course had to be, I guess, separated from the mainland, were the laboratories to try economic reform. So I think there's a history of that, I would add. The second thing, besides being a free trade port, is that it really is a very important demonstration zone for Southeast Asia. And here we're looking at a billion plus people, some of the fastest growth rates in the world, as well as the youngest population. So I think I would add maybe those 2 points as well, that, there's also historical precedent for Hainan Island being an experimental zone. And then I think its proximity and frankly, it's, a core part, I would say, of Southeast Asia. And these make it, I think, two very good reasons in addition to what we just heard.
Right. When were you living there?
Gosh, I was there in the late 90s.
Right.
So
changed a lot.
very,
Transformation.
what we used to call it the Wild West.
Right. Yeah, it seems that at that time it could be, right? Jiahe, were you there like in the 1990s or?
Well, no, I'm a
transformed
bit
a
too
lot.
young for that. I was born in the mid of 1980s, so 1990, I was just a middle school student. So, but while I'm here, yeah, I think it's right. It's been called the Wild West for quite a while, because at the very beginning of the economic reform of China back in the 1980s and early 1990s. Hainan is a place that has been given a huge amount of space for reforming the economy. And it's a lot of jobs that they have been doing here.
Yeah, it used to be Wild West, but now it's the pioneer of a lot of policy experiments. Then to Mike, and I'm not sure if you've been to Hainan before, but as we know, Europe, including Britain, is also pursuing a transition away from fossil fuel powered vehicles. And Norway has become the world's first country to effectively phase out the sale of new fossil fuel powered cars. So do you see any similarities between Hainan and Norway in terms of the conditions that have enabled both to pursue this kind of transition?
Yes, many. I mean, they've been mentioned in the context of Hainan already, so perhaps won't go into those in too many details. So despite the vast difference, the geographical difference, and perhaps cultural and historical differences, there are very, very similar structural similarities. So whilst Norway is not technically an island, it has a huge concentration or population concentration in coastal areas, major highway corridors. So the traveling distance between major hubs, let's say Norway to Oslo to Bergen, is manageable with electric cars and battery range. So that isn't an issue. So yes, so this testing ground, this isolated nature of their population is very, very much a key similarity. Clean energy grids is another one as well. So Norway's hydropower is really the envy of Europe, an abundant source when it comes to clean energy, a bit like Hainan with its strategic location, obviously solar power, wind power. So definitely, and I think the attitude of the people as well. So the panelists have already said that the people of Hainan, really consumer adoption's an issue here, and they already have quite willingly adopted this policy and looking at clean energy, electric cars quite naturally as well. So both very, very similar in terms of testing grounds, both governments in terms of local government and also national government in China, very strict in terms of financial policies and penalizing those that don't follow government policy as well. So very, very much similar geographical areas, similar culture when it comes to clean energy. It'd be interesting to see how they both develop over the next 5 years. The UK government have clear policies, and it'll be interesting to see how those develop as well. We'll probably talk about those later. So yes, Norway and Hainan are both really pioneers that many countries and many regions can learn from.
You add something to that, a little bit of color about Norway.
Right.
Norway's sovereign wealth fund, so the country's money that it invests, is actually the largest in the world, with more than $2 trillion in assets. And the head of the fund is a guy named Nikolai Tangen, and he's very well known for championing investments in renewable energy.
Right.
And so CATL, contemporary Amperex technology, or Ningda Shidai, right, is one of their, I would say, maybe investments they're proudest of. And I think, again, this shows another connection between Norway, environmental sustainability, and what we see going on in Hainan, but really as an example of the broader shift in China towards renewable energy.
Right. That's a very novel angle. Then, like Mike mentioned, we'll compare the differences later on. But let's first take a look at what actually this policy Hainan is going to implement covers. Some people assume that a ban on the sale of fossil fuel-powered vehicles means existing gasoline cars will no longer be allowed on the road. Andy, is that so?
Well, I'm actually not familiar with the specifics of this, but I would say that, I can't imagine any country doing something like that, right? I mean, usually how these things work is you ban the sale, and then, gradually as the ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles age out, right, and then are taken off the road. There typically is some sort of transition mechanism, and perhaps with a hard deadline at some point. But, I think, again, not just the Chinese government, but I think any government really has to balance the interest of the environment, businesses, and consumers, because we also have to recognize, for most people, an automobile is a very significant investment.
Yeah, I think
that's a very good point, Andy. And just to pitch in there, the UK government's policy is exactly that so petrol fuel cars won't be banned at all. It's just the new car sales and hybrids where this will kick in very soon.
Right. I was about to ask Jiahe. I think Andy is basically right, Jiahe? This phase out plan, how it works.
Well, I think it's not really a big problem for Hainan to completely actually ban all the traditional cars and fossil cars because I've been talking to quite many local friends here. It's not many people are choosing fossil cars anymore. So I think they give themselves 4 years ahead because it's 2026 right now. It's another 4 years. It's pretty enough room to do that because it's not many people are buying fossil cars anymore. Because if you are living in Hainan, you really don't want a fossil car. It's not a large province. You drive from one place to another. It's about 100, maximum 200 kilometers. You don't have the worrying of whether your car can go there or not. There's so many charging stations, so not worrying about the charging. It's much cheaper for your operation. And they have already risen the price of oil in Hainan province to a very high level compared with other provinces of China. So if you buy a fossil car, it's going to cost much more money. And one of the very important things is that Hainan is it's a place with the tropical weather. It's warm during the winter. It's really hot during the summer. So if you compare fossil cars, traditional cars, and electrical vehicles, a very significant difference is that if you use your air conditioner on your new energy vehicles, the electrical vehicle, you barely don't cost much things, because air conditioner would cost about 5% of your battery every day if you turn it on whenever you go. But if you use a fossil car, then it's going to cost you quite a lot of oil, because you have to generate the electricity from the oil first. And in Hainan, I think it's about 8 months of the year you have to use AC on your car. So it's basically not many people are choosing fossil cars already, and I think they can definitely do that.
This has been the Chat Lounge. Then what has Hainan done to move closer to its 2030 goal of ending the sale of new gasoline-powered cars? We'll find out after the break. Stay with us.
From the refreshing cup of tea that starts your morning, to the paper that you write on, the roots of many familiar parts of modern life can be traced back to ancient ideas.
Of tea and dumped the whole thing straight into the ice. Rice even served as currency in 794. A new paper mill was founded in the Bastin.
Across mountains, deserts, and oceans, these creations shaped the world then and continue to influence all of us today. Join us on Made in Ancient China and discover how ideas born millennia ago became some of the world's greatest treasures.
Welcome to Made in Ancient China. We hope you enjoyed this journey. May your thoughts...
Made in Ancient China brings you stories of human ambition, inspiration, and connection. Now available on all major podcast platforms.
You're listening to the Chat Lounge, and we are talking about Hainan's fossil fuel car phase-out plan. Let's go through what Hainan has gone through over the past few years to take a closer look at what happened since it's first introduced this plan. Actually, Hainan released its clean energy vehicle development plan in 2019. And the rollout has been gradual, starting with government fleets, buses, and taxis before expanding to private vehicles. And I just read that it seems last year, all those government cars or buses and taxis, like Jiahe mentioned, almost 99% of taxis of clean energy, right? Or electric vehicles. So maybe, Andy, what does this phased approach tell us about China's policymaking in this regard?
Well, yeah, so this is a great question, Yun. And I think, Hainan is very unique in several ways. I mean, obviously it's quite removed from the mainland of China in some ways, in a cultural distance, political distance. And I think what this has meant, historically, is that sometimes I think the ambition outruns the ability to implement on the ground, right? And I think maybe this transition towards renewable energy is another example as well. Because when we look at the free trade port, there's also, I think, a plan or the ambition to make Hainan at least a regional financial services sector, right? To attract global financial talent from London, from New York, from Tokyo, from Hong Kong. And, on the one hand, these things do take a long time, and we shouldn't measure them in months or maybe not even years. But at the same time, I think it is recognized in policymaking circles in China that, Hainan really, it takes a lot of work, and maybe it'll take a little bit more time as well.
Though we are confident that this will eventually, or Hainan will eventually reach that goal, there is still some bottlenecks there. As the adoption has grown rapidly, Hainan also experienced some problems such as long charging queues, during the Spring Festival holiday. So, Jiahe, going forward, do you think such challenges will hamper to any extent the process that Hainan has to go through, to reach that goal?
Well, it's very interesting because you just mentioned that Hainan is having this problem of having the queue over the Spring Festival for the
It's
charging
related to
station.
supporting infrastructure, right?
Yeah. But well, that's something we have to think about first is that the queue that we see during the Spring Festival in Hainan's charging stations does not mean that Hainan does not have enough infrastructure equipment.
All right.
It's actually something special because Hainan is a place for traveling. So you get a huge amount of tourists coming in during the winter, and it's a tropical weather, so it's basically not many people coming in during the summer. For example, in July this month, you can see much less people are coming over to the hotels here. But if you go to the winter, you see a huge amount of people coming in. So the electrical vehicles in queue would be probably doubled during especially the Spring Festival where people get a long holiday. So you see queues sometimes over that time. But during the normal days of Hainan right now, you don't really see much queues. I talked to many people who are using their electrical vehicles, and they don't have much problems charging at all. And they can have the charging station, the charging grounds back their home. So it's basically not that large a problem. What I would say is that the queue that we see during the Spring Festival is something really special caused by the very nature that Hainan is the place for tourists.
While Hainan is saying that it will ban the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030, it exempts plug-in hybrids and extended range electric vehicles from those sales ban. So some people argue that this creates some loophole and weakens the broader goal of moving away from fossil fuels. Mike, do you agree? What's your view there?
I think most people would agree, but I think Andy made a good point. You've got to balance all stakeholder expectations and requirements here. So many people will drive. I know many people who drive hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and you've got to phase in this change. It's a big investment. It's a big change in their lives. And again, that's the UK policy. I think new car sales from 2030, zero emissions, and then plug-ins and the hybrids 2035. I think that's UK government policy. So I think it makes sense. And I think it's characteristic of the China central government's policy strategy generally, which is evolutionary and not revolutionary, very incremental. And that's where Hainan is an excellent testing ground to see what actually happens on the ground and how people's lives change for the better and to try to manage that. So I think it does make sense. This is a step-by-step change. This is a major change in our lives, in our economies. So a sweeping ban and revolutionary change is really going to harm various aspects of the economy. So I think there will be challenges ahead. So I think it does make sense to be a little bit more incremental. Just one point where Hainan's concerned, one of the bottlenecks I think could be the maritime transport. Obviously, it's a major seaport, free trade status, and the logistics, the trucks to transport on and off major shipping loads are going to be more difficult to actually transition to clean energy. And I think there needs to be some innovation there. But generally, the hybrids are phasing out those more gradually, I think makes economic sense. Yeah.
Right, quite sensible. Then let's take a look at the impact in and beyond Hainan. Once in place, what impact will this policy have on, consumers and other stakeholders related to the broader automotive ecosystem or auto industry? Shall we begin with Andy, please?
Sure. Well, Yun, I think, again, we can't look at this in isolation because, again, one of the distinctive features of Chinese governance is that it is systematic and comprehensive at the national and the strategic level. But at the execution level, we think about, in the city or the regional level, in the initial stages, there's room for a lot of experimentation and variation, because often when you're doing something new and something important, no one really knows, what is the thing that works. So I think we should look at it in this context. But, if we step back and look at what is happening in this transition to renewable energy, it really is remarkable. China's gone from zero to a global leader in terms of manufacturing of electric vehicles, including hybrids as well. And we see this everywhere. We see it in Beijing, we see it in Shanghai. I don't know if I have the statistic right. Maybe Jiahe, knows this better than I do. But I think that in Beijing now, more than 50% of the vehicles on the road are not ICE, not internal combustion engine vehicles. So it's not just in Hainan, but again, I think we see this playing out throughout the country and having impact all around the world. Of course, this is one of the sticking points for the China-European relationship, EU relationship, because Germany has built such a legacy of manufacturing, exporting ICE vehicles. And even in the United States, there's now talk that the United States cannot keep out Chinese EVs forever because they're just so inexpensive, so well designed, and increasingly so demanding by consumers. So, again, we see this, I think, as part of a broader picture. I see it as part of a broader picture.
But across the entire automotive value chain, who do you think will stand to benefit most, and who may face the greatest challenges then, in terms of Hainan?
Yeah, well, so this is actually the subject of my book, right? How does, China, any country, take an idea and turn it into national capability? And when we're looking at a place like Hainan, what the government is very, very good at is building the arena and guaranteeing demand. So the problem with entrepreneurs, innovators in places like the United States is they're always facing this question: if I create this new technology, will there be a market for it, right? But in China, it's actually, there'll be a market for it because the government guarantees the demand. Look at in Hainan, right? By saying, look, we're phasing out internal combustion engine vehicles, which means that if you need a new car, you're going to buy an electric vehicle one, most likely. And then you have to decide, well, I'm going to buy an XPeng, I'm going to buy a BYD, a Xiaomi. But whoever you buy, it's going to be clear that at the societal level, there's going to be major positive progress. But at the company level, the competition is brutal. So the question for any Chinese entrepreneur is not, is there a market? Because the government already gives you the answer. But can I survive the arena? Meaning there'll be hundreds, maybe thousands of companies fighting it out for that market. And will I be one of the survivors is the question. And I think this is what makes it, challenging for an investor, because you can say, look, we know that the EV industry in China is going to be enormous. But if we have to buy the stock of a particular company, which one should it be, right? That is a more interesting, perhaps more challenging question.
Right. As an investor, Jiahe, your take here?
Well, when we look at Hainan's development of electrical vehicles, these kind of things, I think my point would not be concentrating on the development of Hainan's electrical vehicle, because Hainan is actually quite a small place. I mean, the population of Hainan is less than 1% of whole China, so it's actually quite a small place, and the people who buy the electrical, that's why we keep on calling it small island, So the people who are buying electrical vehicles here would be actually quite a small part compared with the overall market of China. So the 2 points I would look at is that, first of all, the experience of Hainan, which is a province that completely bans the selling of traditional cars would show the electrical vehicle companies as well as the companies who are still selling traditional cars a very important lesson regarding whether this can be continued and what problems can be caused. And if everything goes on pretty well after the deadline of 2030, then I think for the companies who are still having the factories and production lines of traditional cars, I think they should make a quicker switch toward the electrical vehicles. So it's basically telling people about how the whole industry would be going on. And the second point would go to the local tourism companies in Hainan, such as the shopping companies, the duty-free shop companies, transportation companies between Hainan and mainland of China. The local tourism guiding companies, local hotels, these kind of businesses. Because if Hainan completely bans the traditional cars, that means the overall province would have even better environment. I mean, Hainan is already having a pretty good environment, but the environment will be even better because the local pollution from fossil burning would be reduced by an even farther extent. That means a pretty good thing for the local tourism market. So for local companies, I think they are also worth the notice of investors.
Indeed, the impact goes beyond the auto industry. Well, like we mentioned, Hainan isn't the first place to pursue this kind of a transition. To better understand Hainan's strategy, let's compare it with Norway's experience, all right? Compared with Norway, how similar is Hainan's pathway? We know Hainan is pursuing a formal province-wide sales ban by 2030, while Norway has, like you already mentioned, has relied primarily on taxes and incentives rather than a legal ban to achieve near universal EV sales. Mike, which approach is more sustainable and more effective in the long run from your perspective?
Well, I think it depends on the context. And as I said at the start of the discussion, there are structural similarities and geographical similarities when it comes to Norway and Hainan. But perhaps the culture is different, particularly across China, where the Norwegian government perhaps don't have to enforce as strictly and don't have to sort of push the consumer into change. It's a very natural thing. It's a very natural, clean lifestyle, clean energy. It has to be where they are. They're not part of the EU. They don't want to be. They're very independent, and that they look after their environment very, very naturally. And it's just a natural thing for those people. So it's perhaps not necessary. So I think that's probably one of the key differences, and extending this across China, I think will be difficult. Obviously with Hainan, you've got the distances, the range, electric cars, the batteries isn't really an issue at all, that people are very comfortable with this lifestyle as well. But perhaps in our bigger cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and some of the distances that people do want to drive will be a barrier, and the government has to implement quite strict policies to force or push that change along. So I think there are differences, and I think that feeds into this. So I think that the China central government have probably got very firm plans to, let's say, encourage mainland car drivers, consumers to follow Hainan's example and implement policies to make sure that really does happen. I think that's going to be a challenge.
Right. Andy, what would be your take?
Well, I would add to what Mike was saying in that, in some ways, Norway and Hainan could not be more different.
Right.
Just throw a couple numbers at you. The per capita GDP in Norway is almost 100,000 US dollars, right? It's the fifth highest in the world. As Mike said, I think Norway also is very highly educated, very socially aware in a very, I think, European sense. Whereas if we look at Hainan, I would say there's actually two populations, right? And Jiahe touched on this. There's the local people, the Hainan people, that are the indigenous people that were always there. But there's also a second population that Jiahe called the tourists, but I would actually maybe call them what do you call them? Snowbirds, right?
Right.
So in the United States, many New Yorkers, especially wealthier New Yorkers, spend the winter in Florida because the weather is nice. And in Hainan, especially in places like Sanya, there are a lot of people from northeastern China who keep a place or maybe several places in Hainan so they can spend the winter there because, the winters in Dongbei and the northeast China are famously cold, right? So you have these two populations. And I think what unites them, though, is that I don't think they're anywhere near as socially aware and perhaps, if I can even use this term, socially responsible in a European sense. So what this means is that Norwegians may say, look, I have the money and I want to buy an electric vehicle, even though it might be more expensive, even though it might be less convenient, whatever. But I think from a local population perspective, and even from these snowbirds, if I can call them that, are maybe a little bit pragmatic, right? And I think this is where, again, we've seen the Chinese government be enormously effective in many, many things, right? Where the inclination would be to not do something, but the long-term good for the local population as well as the country is to endure some short-term discomfort, right? And I think this is maybe, to me, the biggest difference between Norway and Hainan.
All right.
I think
What
I'd
do you
say,
call
but
a
I think we cover
snowbird?
all the way the rest of Europe as well. So I think that's going to be a challenge in the UK. Norway is really setting a very
Great point, Mike. Yes, absolutely. I think the UK, even maybe France and Italy as well.
Yeah.
yeah.
But to Jiahe, from a semi-Hainaner perspective, how would you interpret this? Why do you think China wouldn't adopt what Norway did, like providing some tax or other incentives, instead of taking a ban, which sounds kind of cold and stiff, right?
Well, actually, I think one point that has just been mentioned is right, that Hainan's per capita GDP is much lower compared with Norway. I mean, I checked the data. Hainan's per capita GDP is about 1/7 of Norway. So you're talking about actually two very different economies. So this is one reason. Also, China's government has been very famous for being proactive, and we can see China has been doing so many proactive things in many ways. So it's different government, different societies. And another reason is that China has already conducted quite many market-oriented measures in order to contain the using of traditional cars. And these measures have actually been working quite effectively. For example, in the whole province of Hainan, you don't pay any price if you go to the highway or whatever. In many provinces of China, you have to pay a certain kind of token for using the highway. But in Hainan, you don't pay that price. But what they do is that they raise the price of the oil, the fossil, to about 200% of mainland. So if you're using electrical vehicle here, you get a lot of benefits coming from the people who are using traditional cars, because they are buying much more expensive, fuels compared to people living in mainland. But if you are using, fossil car here, you're using traditional car here, you bear a huge amount of cost. That's why many people are not choosing traditional cars anymore in Hainan. And this time, I think they just set up a policy, everything has to come to an end. So it's probably, I think the government feels that it's already so many electrical vehicles selling in the island. So it's probably the time to completely ban this. Why not?
You've been listening to the Chat Lounge. Up next, we'll explore what Hainan's policy could mean, not just for the island, but for China and the wider world. Keep it here.
I cannot marry you while your mother regards me.
Step into the world of timeless elegance with Mrs. Spring Fragrance, a captivating audiobook by Edith Eaton, read by Man Ling.
Because the green leaf still clings to the bough.
Experience the lively yet complex lives in Chinese American communities at the turn of the 20th century as Edith Eaton's delicate prose weaves together themes of tradition, change, love, and identity.
Forget all that belongs to the joy of life.
Follow the journey of Mrs. Spring Fragrance and witness the struggles and fights of those living on a rapidly changing exotic land while holding on to their cultural traditions, or more importantly, to their identities.
He could hardly believe that his daughter was seriously opposed to becoming the wife of such a good-looking, prosperous young merchant as Wang Ling.
Join Books and Beyond for Mrs. Spring Fragrance. Let the stories come to life in your imagination. Subscribe to Books and Beyond for free on your favorite podcast platforms, or log on to radio.cgtn.com for more.
Welcome back to the chat. Given that Hainan has made the 2030 sales ban a formal policy commitment, what would you say its biggest implication might be, once it takes effect? Some people argue this isn't simply about replacing, gasoline cars with electric ones. It's more about reshaping the entire transportation and energy ecosystem. And if Hainan succeeds, could its biggest legacy be, not a new kind of car, but a new model for, urban development and a green transition? Jiahe, what's your take?
Yeah, I think you're talking about a very important point, is that if this banning of traditional car in Hainan, finally being conducted and did not cause a lot of unexpected problems, then that's really showing a very good example to the other cities and provinces of China that you actually can do this. You don't have to use the fossil cars, and it's possible to completely switch to the electrical vehicles. And if they meet some problems, I think they definitely will meet some problems. For example, there will be a lot of pressure onto the power grid. They have to upgrade quite a lot of power grid, all sorts of things. And these would also be quite valuable lessons for other provinces. I mean, if you want to increase the percentage of electrical vehicles in your province or in your city, how much charging stations are you needing? How strong your power grid has to be? I mean, these are all sorts of problems. And this experience from Hainan would definitely, show a very good lesson to the other cities and provinces.
Then there comes the next question. Jiahe said it could be implemented or promoted across the country, but which region is most likely to follow Hainan's lead? Jiahe, do you have any pick?
Well, I think you would try to find answer for this question from a few perspectives. First of all, it has to be a place where you have a strong economy. I mean, if you talk about, because China has not a very equal development from province to province and from city to city. For example, Shanghai is really developed. The per capita GDP of Shanghai is, I think, it's reaching about 30,000 USD per capita. So that's close to the level of South Korea. But if you go to some, Western provinces, you find they are much less developed. So you want to do this because it's a transferring toward a more clean energy. You have to, reduce the possession of so many millions and tens of millions of traditional cars. Then you would want to start from rich provinces that include places like Jiangsu, Shanghai, Guangdong province, these kind of provinces and cities, and also Fujian. Another thing we have to consider is weather, because Norway is an exception because it's actually quite cold during the winter. I checked all the data about how the Norwegians are dealing with this problem during the winter, and the data still says that they're battery losing about 30 to 40% capability during the winter of Norway, but they found so many ways to deal with that. And I believe they also cost quite a lot of money to counter this problem. So in China, I think they would start from the places where you have a warmer weather, at least not that cold during the winter. So that would exclude some, northern cities and provinces. So following these two clues, I think you can probably find quite good answers.
All right. If you have to pick one, which one? Like Jiangsu or the Greater Bay Area?
If I need to pick one, then I would say Shenzhen, the city, would probably be the answer, because Shenzhen is rich. Shenzhen is one of the richest cities in China. It's in the south of China. It doesn't have the problem of winter, and Shenzhen is, much more closely connected with technology compared with more traditional cities like Shanghai or Beijing. So for something like electrical vehicle, banning the fossil cars, I think Shenzhen is probably one of the places that will start first. And also, if we look at the local government of Shenzhen, it's having a reputation of being more proactive compared with many other local governments around China. So if they think they should do something, they just make rules. So that's how Shenzhen is like if you talk to the people there. So I think Shenzhen is probably the answer that I would pick.
Right, fair enough. And Andy, what would be your choice or preference?
Well, I'm not sure it would matter, Yoon, because I think it's pretty clear the end point is going to be everywhere in China.
Yeah.
And I think
but people are debating which one should be the next.
Well, I don't have an opinion on this. I mean, I just think, to me, the interesting question is how quickly will we get there?
Right.
And, it certainly seems that it will probably be sooner versus later. Because again, we see the national level emphasis, new quality productive forces, the importance of environmental sustainability. We look at the technology that's available, right? So China's a leader in battery technology, whether we're talking about CATL or BYD. We look at how well designed, how I think well the offerings meet consumer expectations and sometimes even exceed them, right? In China, if you go sit in a Xiaomi car, or you sit in some of the higher end BYD ones, I mean, it's really, really impressive. So I think that, again, it's going to be universal. And, the question is, how long is it going to take? And I think, in my view, it's probably going to happen sooner rather than later.
And Mike, I understand that in Britain, you've met some difficulties in rolling out such policies, or when it comes to implementing those environmental friendly policies in this regard. There are a lot of challenges there. Do you have any, lessons that you think China can borrow, down this road?
Definitely. As I said earlier, the issue of consumer adoption, obviously the infrastructure and the grid. It's widely acknowledged that the national grid it just couldn't cope if there was a sudden surge in electric car sales, and that there has been a surge, but it's still a very small percentage. I think it's like something like 4 to 6% of new cars on the road are actually electric cars. I think it's that low. It is changing, but the consumers are not changing that quickly. So I think in terms of infrastructure, range, those are issues that China needs to think about. And as we've talked about, this little ecosystem, this little eco world of Hainan is quite unique and very, very suitable. So I think definitely thinking about rolling it out across some of these mega cities too soon is a real challenge. And I agree with the panelists. I think the next step is probably a relatively wealthy southern province. Guangdong springs to mind, obviously Shenzhen, Guangzhou. But I think the real issue for China in terms of making an international statement is how quickly and how successfully they can roll something out like this and implement it successfully across Shanghai, because that would really send a statement. So I think that's the issue for me. When Shanghai, and how successful is that going to be? And the sooner, the better. And that will really make a statement globally.
So you're saying it should be a region by region approach, more likely than a single nation.
I think that's the central government's approach. I think that's why they're rolling things out and just looking at Hainan, looking at what they can learn from that. So whether it's a step-by-step approach geographically, and you step around the special economic zones, the relatively wealthy areas where it's likely to be more successful. There's a higher concentration of electric vehicles. Certainly Guangdong again springs to mind, and then you proceed perhaps up the East Coast and work your way up to Shanghai. I think that would make sense. But again, it's very much about keeping an open mind and seeing how lifestyles and economies change. And that could be different across provinces with such a large land mass. Yeah, in China, different provinces are very different, as we know.
Right. But Andy, you prefer a single national timetable?
No, actually. So, yeah, I guess I'm not saying that, it's like the Big Bang, right? So overnight. But, I do think, that Jiahe and Mike make some great points. I mean, Shenzhen makes a lot of sense. I agree that, the local government there is very forward-leaning, and I think, very energetic. Certainly, if we think about Shanghai, more broadly, the Yangtze River Delta is also known for being very, very innovative in technology, and perhaps that wouldn't be it would be complementary, right, to implement a policy like this.
And one special place people mentioned a lot is Xiong'an New Area, which is located about some 100 meters southwest of Beijing, and was created to relieve Beijing of non-essential capital functions. All right, then. We'll have to wait and see. And with that, we've come to the end of the chat of this session. Many thanks to Professor Andy Mok from Beijing Foreign Studies University, also the author of the title, The Innovation Machine, How China Creates and Adopts Technology Through Governance. Mike Bastin from the University of Southampton, England, and Chen Jiahe from Novem Arcae Technologies. Tell us what you think of this topic and the show. Please drop us a line at radio@cgtn.com. I'm Tuyuan. Thank you for being with us. Join us again for more Chat at the Chat Lounge next week. So then, take care.
Hey, smart buddy. Why do the neighbor's boys say I can't be a scientist?
Hi, Jane. Around 30% of scientists in the world are women. Statistically speaking, you are more likely to succeed in arts and literature.
Your customer service has been outrageous.
Sorry, this chatbot has been fed like 572 nasty slurs in the past 3 months. We're fixing it.
You do know AI is just a tool, and there really is no need to say please in the input.
Yes, but that's how I would talk to my kid.
When self-driving cars yield for whistling ambulances. When AI spits out swear words in the place of friendly hellos. We feed tech with more than just binary codes, but the kindling of human civilization, the best and worst of our potentials.
Smart buddy, how do we fix the world?
I see you shared your last cookie. You've just made it better. And I believe when we grow up together, we can do much more.
Hey there, global listeners. Get ready for the hottest discussions on the airwaves. Roundtable, your passport to the heart of China's buzzing society. Pressing issues, lifestyle trends, and impactful policies, we're tackling them head on with wit, wisdom, and a whole lot of fun. Discover the real China through the eyes and voices of its people. Gain a unique global perspective on topics that resonate universally. Tune in and turn up the excitement dial on Roundtable as we bridge gaps and break barriers one discussion at a time. Don't just listen, be transformed.